morning, everyone. Today I have a new friend, Charles Merriott, who was a 20th SOS pilot, Huey pilot. So thank you very much, Charles, for joining me today. I know that we did talk off air last weekend and we had a bit of a technical glitch, so we're going to stick to that format. Um, I think what might be interesting to start is could you explain to people the need for helicopter pilots and how the Air Force drew them out of fixed wing because that was your case, right? That you were a fixed wing pilot. So can we talk about that for just a minute?
Yeah, I was sitting in Charleston Air Force Base flying C-141s in 1970, and the military gives me a call like they will when you're going to get an assignment, and said, "Hey, we got an assignment for you to Vietnam. We're going to put you into AC-119s." Well, I didn't know what an AC-119 was, but it was an original Puff the Magic Dragon. It was
Okay.
a
Yep.
gunship. And I said, "Well, I can't do that right now because my wife's going to have a baby." And they said, "Oh, well, let's get back with you." And so they got back with me and said, "We'll delay you going over to Vietnam for a while." So a few months later, after we have the baby, I get another call and said, "Hey, it's time now for you to go over to Vietnam." So, well, what am I going to do? Where are you going to fly helicopters? I never flew helicopters. I was a fixed wing pilot. I had 2,000 hours in a C-141 aircraft commander, and I was real happy. I'd been to Vietnam, but I'd been flying 141s over there carrying cargo and, bringing things back from Vietnam. So I went to Shepherd Air Force Base, and they taught me how to fly helicopters. And I thought it'd be an easy path because I was a 2,000-hour pilot and I could fly anything. Well, I'd never flown a helicopter before, and it was very difficult. But the reason they called a lot of guys like myself, primarily, C-141 pilots, B-52, KC-135 were three of the prime examples of guys that we had in our unit, was they were running out of helicopter pilots. They just didn't have enough helicopter pilots to do the job. So they had to transfer or train fixed wing pilots into flying helicopters. So we went to Shepherd. I learned how to fly a helicopter. They sent me to Hurlburt, taught me how to fly a gunship helicopter. Then I went through all the survival schools and ended up in Vietnam flying helicopters, which I never thought I would do. And I wasn't real happy when I got the assignment, but after flying helicopters, it was the most fun thing I ever did because it is a true pilot's machine to fly. You have to use both hands, both legs. It's fun to fly.
What did you feel was the hardest part? Like you said that you were a very well-versed fixed wing pilot that could probably do loops and barrel rolls and all these fun things and all that kind of stuff. What do you feel was the hardest part as far as flying a chopper? Was it landing, takeoffs, or those kind of things? What was challenging for you about learning to fly the helicopter?
Initially, it was just pulling it into a hover and holding the helicopter into a hover because it took everything you had to keep that thing right there 4 foot above the ground facing one direction because it wanted to go up, it wanted to go down, it wanted to go left, it wanted to go right. So a hover was the most difficult thing to do. And it took probably, I don't know, 7 to 10 hours to really figure out how to properly fly the helicopter. And then it was sort of like the first time you jumped on a bicycle. You got out there and said, "God, this is difficult." And after just a short period of time, you said, "Why didn't I pick this up easier?" Well, about that 10th hour in helicopter training, you said, "Oh, this is not as hard as I thought it was." Yeah. So initially, with just trying to lift it up into a hover and hold it still in a perfect hover was very difficult.
Now, one thing that I found really quite amazing was your teachers, trainers in the US. They felt that what they were teaching you guys to be helicopter pilots flying 50 feet above the treetop level, you'll be fine. So I know that wasn't the case. So can we go into that kind of that a little bit of that chat on how your new instructor said, "Hey, guess what?
Yeah, that didn't happen until we got to know. So I went to Hurlburt and they taught me how to fly a helicopter gunship. And so we had the mini guns, and we had the rockets, and we had ranges there in Florida. And we went out, and they taught us how to fly a helicopter gunship. Now we were probably flying 50, 75 feet above the trees. Okay, so we get to Vietnam, and I get there, and probably about the first week, they take me out on a training mission, and the instructor pilot says, okay, show me how to fly a dog bone pattern. So I flew a dog bone pattern. And he says, you want to get killed while you're in Vietnam? I said, no, not exactly. He says, well, let me show you how to fly a dog bone pattern. And I was probably flying the pattern, like what they taught me, 75, 50 foot above the trees. Well, he went down treetop level, and in every turn, he cut the leaves out of the top of the trees. And he said, if you want to survive, this is how you fly here. Skids in the trees, fly them just a little bit in the turns, so that the blades don't hit the tree limbs themselves, and then back down right on treetop level. And that's what we did. Everybody learned how to fly that way.
And so to explain to the public, what would be the benefit of flying that low? Why would you want to risk being that low? And when your instructor is telling you if you want to live, so I know the answer to this, but to the people watching this, they may not. Why would you not want to be higher so that you would be definitely not risking hitting a tree?
Well, everybody's walked through a forest. So when you look up the treetops, look straight up, something has to fly directly above your head for you to see it. Okay. So the lower you are, the less chance they're going to see you. If you're higher up, they have more visibility and they can fire at you for a greater time. So we tried to get down as low as we possibly could so that window was closed, that they didn't have much time to shoot at us. So we flew, when they said treetop level, we flew treetop level.
And at this point in the actual Hueys that you're flying, the pilots are sitting in a kind of a bulletproof seat, but that's about it. And you had said to me that you also had your the chicken plate, that you had the front and the back, and that you would give the rear panel of the chicken plate to the gunner so they could stand on. So just for the people listening to this, you in a Huey, there's not much there to stop like even a small round, like an AK. It's going straight through that window, those plastic windows, or even the airframe, right?
There was zero armor on the helicopter itself except for that armored seat. So any bullet was coming through the windshield or through the metal surrounding you. Yeah. So we did have that armored seat, and it had side on it that you could pull up, and it would protect your side, and it would protect, your bottom and your back. And then we had that chicken plate on that came right up to your neck, and it pretty well protected your chest. So when you were getting shot at, you fitted yourself as tight as you possibly could in that seat, so you got as much protection as possible. And we did take the back part of that chicken plate off and give it to the gunners because they didn't have any armor, for them to stand on. So we gave that to them, and they had the chicken plate on front and back, and then they had our back plate that they were standing on, and it gave them some protection there in the back.
I think it's something that we should just take a step back. People might not know what a dog bone pattern is, and they're probably still trying to imagine what dog bone pattern. So we better explain to people what that way of flying, especially as you had educated me, that if you're flying multiple, helicopters over an LZ, that pattern, what does that pattern enable you to do as pilots?
Well, basically, visualize a straight line, okay? And at the end of each one of those lines, you have a loop, okay? And we flew two ships. And so one ship would come down, enter the pattern, and be flying that straight line and firing at the bad guys. And when he got to the end of that point, he made a turn, 45-degree turn, and started to loop so he could come back in and fire again. Well, just as he made this turn off, the second gunship would enter that straight line and be firing. That would be protecting the guys on the ground, but also protecting that helicopter that's making that loop turn to come back in. Then we would meet head on, and that second gunship would break 45 degrees, and the other helicopter would start firing at that time. So if the pattern worked perfect, you had minigun fire on the enemy positions all the time. There was no chance for them to really fire back at you. And the guys on the ground, our buddies on the ground, the Green Beret, says the best feeling in the world was a hot brass falling on top of their heads.
Now, not to mention any names because I actually don't know any. But were there pilots that you felt more comfortable flying with that you know that they were? I mean, we all have people that we jive with better. And so, if I'm going to work, if I'm working with so and so, oh, good, John's on this. So, again, no names mentioned, but were there pilots that you felt more comfortable flying into combat with?
Oh yeah, the pilots that were pure helicopter pilots, that were helicopter pilots before they went over there, they had a lot more time, and they were just better pilots than we were, just because they'd done it longer. So you felt real comfortable with them, and they were good instructor pilots. They taught us everything that they knew. And so we trusted them, and we picked up the little techniques from everybody. We never flew with one person over a week. So we were always flying with somebody different. And you'd take something from one pilot and make it your own, and take something else from another pilot and make it your own. And eventually you had what you wanted to be able to go out there and feel safe. Yeah. So yeah, there were some really good pilots in the Green Hornets.
And I think something that you taught me last weekend was that about that you would the kind of the rotation of that you being in BMT, or then you would be out for a bit. So can we talk about that a bit? You said it was kind of like you would be a week out there and then you'd be back to behind the enemy line. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I was primarily at Cameron Bay. I was probably the last pilot to report to Huey Air Force Base. And I got in there on a Thursday night, met Jack Heil, and they went on a mission the next day. And we got orders to pack up, and we were going to move to Cameron Bay. So I was only at Huey for like 2 days, 3 days. And but the mission was, we trained at our home base, and my home base was going to be Cameron Bay. So we'd be at Cameron Bay, and we'd train new pilots, go out, train ourselves, and just stay really active so that we were right on top of the ball and we knew exactly what we were doing. The other guys would be at Merriott flying the actual combat missions. And we would always have probably 6 birds out there, 4 gunships, a couple slicks, and they would stay for 7 days. And then we would rotate. And we normally rotate on a Blackbird, a C-130 or a C-123 that would come pick us up and drop us off at Merriott. And then we would stay 7 days, and we'd rotate back, and that group would come back and replace us. So we actually flew combat missions for 7 straight days. Then we were off for 7 days. But even when you were off out doing the training, you got shot at. So, I mean, you weren't really off.
Right.
But, it wasn't flying the special forces into Cambodia, So it was totally different environment.
I think that your story, I don't think you'd mind if we shared it. I think it was kind of dark humor, but no one got killed, about the enemy guy who was alone in the field, who decided to play John Wayne. So can we
Oh, yeah.
Can we chat about that one?
We had some fun times, and I'll tell a story on myself that I'm not real proud of, but we were flying out. It was a hot mission, so we launched out of one of the FOLs, forward operating locations, and we were in Cambodia, and we were going across an open field. We normally didn't fly across open fields, but there were places in Cambodia that were sort of like Kansas. They were just flat, and occasionally you had no choice. So we were flying across this field, and the left gunner called up and said, "Sir, we got a guy down here who just shot at us, and it's North Vietnamese. Am I cleared to fire back?" I said, "Sure, you can fire back. He shot at us." So he opened up on the guy, and the guy took off running, and his helmet came off. He threw his gun away, and you could see the tracers getting really, really close to this guy. And he was running as hard as he could, and he made it into the tree line. And we all said to ourselves, I'll bet you he never shoots at a Green Hornet again. And it was kind of funny. We didn't get him. He got into the tree lines, but he left everything out in that open field that he had with him.
I'm sure that he had like a brow of sweat, like, oh my God, you know.
Oh, for but a funny story. I just got checked out as an aircraft commander. And here again, we were at one of the FOLs. And we always had the birds ready to fly. So all you had to do is jump in a seat and push a button, and the engine started up, and you'd be airborne in a minute. Yeah. So we called cocking the helicopter. So all you had to do is jump in, put your seatbelt on, hit the engine, and off you would go. So we got an alert that one of the teams was in bad trouble. We had to get out there as soon as possible. So, man, I'm an aircraft commander. So we jump out there, get the helicopter cranked up. I take off. And I called back to the backs and said, hey, okay, gunners, check in. Nothing but silence. Gunners, check in. Nobody said a word. And I looked around and I saw a gunner's belt just waving in the wind back there. I'd left the two gunners on the ground. And about that time, they called and said, hey, you need to come back and pick up your gunners. But I probably made the fastest takeoff of anybody.
And I'm sure
but it'd been nice to have the two gunners.
I'm sure that they were going, Charles,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
And I say two gunners. We always flew with a gunner and a flight mechanic. So they were both on the guns, but they weren't truly two gunners, one flight mechanic, one gunner. That way, if we had a breakage or something happened to the helicopter, we had an expert in the back that could fix it.
Yeah, and I'm sure that he had a small toolkit. He probably couldn't take too much with him, right?
The biggest tool they had was a screwdriver about this long, because the minigun would jam occasionally.
Okay.
And that screwdriver was how they would get it to unjam. Yeah.
And at this point that you were there, did the gunners have the tin can on the M60, or were they using the minigun at that point?
We had two different type birds. We had gunships and we had slicks. And the slicks had the M60s. The gunships had the miniguns. And our commander, when I was there, gave us a choice of what we wanted to fly. And he said, you can be a slick pilot or you can be a gun pilot. And I would rather shoot back at the guys than being shot at all the time. And the M60s were a good machine gun, but the minigun fired 2,000 to 4,000 rate of fire, and you really put a lot more down. And when we were on target and the gunner was firing 4,000 rounds, the guys didn't normally shoot back at us because they were spraying that area so heavy with bullets, that they didn't want to get shot either. And it allowed us to make a couple passes, bring the slick helicopter in, pick up the team on the ground, and then exit. So if everything worked perfect, we wouldn't be down on the trees very long. We wanted to get down there real quick, get the guys out and back.
And you said that when you landed, or you didn't land, but when you had a team that you were either dropping off or picking up, that you would hover just above the ground, just so that you could leave a lot faster, right? That you were able to keep.
It wasn't to leave faster. The biggest problem when you actually put the skids on the ground, the guys wanted to get off the helicopter as quick as they could.
Right.
And so sometimes they would jump off and sometimes they would fall. Well, you didn't want to land on their leg or their foot. So we tried to bring the helicopter down to, about a foot off the ground. That way, if they did get something underneath the skid, it wouldn't break their leg. So we tried to get down to about a foot off the ground when they jumped off.
So you were, the war was made real for you as far as in a combat role, like on your first day when you met Jack Hill. And I mean, by the sounds of things, he was a very nice man. And unfortunately, events unfolded that would bring forth that you were in a combat zone and how quickly things could go sideways, right?
Yeah. It was brought home to me real quick. So let me just drop back to the day before. So I'd been to the Philippines and gone through jungle survival school. And so I left the Philippines and landed at Tan Son Nhut. And this just give you an idea of what Vietnam was like. So we land at Tan Son Nhut. I'm hungry. I get out of the airplane, walk over to the base operations. and I find a lady there selling sandwiches. So I say, well, okay, I'm just gonna get myself a sandwich, okay? Because I got plenty of time before I'm supposed to get picked up. So I walk over and I pick out a bologna sandwich, and she starts fixing it for me. So she reaches in and gets a slice of bread and grabs a piece of bologna with her hand, places it on a dirt floor, you
Oh,
know, and then asks me if I want mustard or anything else on there, and fixes my sandwich on the dirt floor. And I say to myself, welcome to Vietnam. It's going to be a little bit different world. So I eat the sandwich because I was hungry. And so I walk over to base ops and I said, hey, I'm Captain Merriott and I'm supposed to be picked up here. Oh, yeah, your aircraft is landing out there right now. You can see it on the runway. And I look out there and it's a blackbird with no markings, no Air Force markings, no markings of any type on this aircraft. So that's kind of unusual to me. So the aircraft taxis in, and I'm sitting over there, and another Green Hornet pilot that's just like myself, brand new, comes in and introduces himself to me. And we sit there, watch this airplane, and it stops its engines, and the crew gets out, and they walk toward base op, and they're all Chinese. And we look at one another saying, what's going on here? So they come in, go over to the base ops window, and they point to us, and they come over and introduce themselves. And they're Chinese pilots working for the U.S. Air Force, flying these blackbirds. So they take us out to the airplane and put us in the airplane. It happens to be a C-123. They have jet assist engines on the side of the aircraft.
oh, really? Wow.
And they said, hey, this is going to be really loud. Do you have any ear protection? And neither one of us had earplugs. And they said, okay, we'll give you some. And they take 2 shells out of their belt, 38s, and give them to us. And so you just put them in your ears. So here I am sitting in this blackbird with Chinese pilots, no markings, with 238 shells in my ear, and we take off. So I get to Huey, and Carrington meets us, and he's going to be my official sponsor, while I'm in that area for a while. And he says, are you hungry? And this is probably 3 or 4 hours after I'd eaten lunch. I said, sure, let's go to the officers club. So we get to the club, and he introduces me to Jack Heil, which is one of his best buddies. And we have dinner together and have a drink. And they said, hey, we can't stay long because we have to fly tomorrow out of Bambi-Tulit. I said, okay. So we go home, and, I'm rooming with Carrington that night. And he says, don't get up early tomorrow morning because I've got to get up early, jump on a bird, and I'm heading to the Bambi-Tulit. So I don't know. So I wander around, and it's probably, I don't know, 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And there's a knock on the door, and a guy comes in and says, hey, just want to let you know your roommate was just shot down. And Jack Heil and one of the gunners are dead. Okay, and the commander wants to see you. So I go over and meet the commander, and he says, I would like for you to go into Jack's room and pack all of his stuff up so we can send it home. So I'd been in Vietnam one night and thought to myself, this is going to be a long year.
Yeah. That's got to be a real kick in the gut. You meet some guys, you have a couple beers, a couple of laughs, and then you yourself are just trying to settle in and prime yourself for, okay, I'm going to be flying into a very hot zone that the public don't know, the U.S. public don't know that we're flying in at all. And now I have to go into this man's room where his bed is still warm, basically, and pack up. That's got to be.
It was hard to do, even though I didn't know him very well.
Yeah.
It was very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah. That's too bad. I guess to take a little step back again for the public, even though I keep saying that, the Chinese pilots, they were probably from Taiwan, right? They were. Yeah.
Taiwanese, yeah.
Yeah, just so people don't think China. I've never heard of Chinese pilots, so they were Taiwanese, and yeah. But that I've heard of the Blackbird landing. Did they take you in a van that had the blacked out windows to the plane, to the Blackbird, or?
No, it was all in the open there at Tan Son Nhut. Yes. But it was just a rude awakening to what was the unit I was going to. I knew it was a special operations unit, but I really didn't know what special operations meant until I got there and started figuring things out.
Now, being a new pilot, when you're actually over there, are you flying co-pilot for a while until you prove yourself, or had you proved yourself? I mean, there's learning how to fly. There's your training in the U.S., but you haven't flown on those AOs before, and the temperature is different. The landscape is different. Everything is different. So, are you flying as a co-pilot first to get your your feet wet, as it were?
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. This the secret to survival in a combat zone is basically experience and some luck. Yeah, and you get experience, and so they allowed us to fly co-pilot. Probably, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks. I forget how long it was, but we did fly co-pilot for a while, and that's where they really taught you how to all fly the maneuvers that we were doing. And we flew other patterns besides dog bone, but that was probably what we flew 90% of the time. If a gun broke, we changed the pattern. You couldn't fly the dog bone with a broken gun, so you had to change it. But yeah, we all flew co-pilot for a while, and then we upgraded to aircraft commander.
And so, was that kind of when you actually got your own bird? Is that what you would call it, a bird? What would the guys call it?
Yeah, we called them birds.
Okay,
Well, we didn't. We called them B1RDs. We
okay,
didn't say bird. It's a B1RD.
okay, okay.
I
So when
hadn't thought
you
of that term since 1970.
there you go. So when you first got your BIRD, did you was it like, were you nervous at all, or were you very comfortable?
I was comfortable. I mean, the first time you're an aircraft commander and you're getting shot at, it's a little bit different. You're not quite ready for that. But they didn't let us take over as aircraft commander until they were sure we were capable of flying the mission.
Now, one question I think I asked you last week, or I forget, but rules of engagement. So, um, are you, as you're flying to your LZ or whatever, or the whatever your mission is, the gunners, I'm sure, are going to test their guns, make sure everything's functioning. But are you guys as pilots giving rules of engagement? And if so, what were those rules?
Yeah, we had rules of engagements. Primarily, places we flew, within 5 minutes, we were in Cambodia or Laos. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
our forward operating locations, we spent the night at Bambi Tuot. We didn't fly our missions out of Bambi Tuot. We'd launch early in the morning out of Bambi Tuot and fly to a forward operating location right next to the Cambodian border. And that's where we'd launch our missions. So when we took off, we made the guns hot. And basically, we would fire at anything that fired at us. I don't ever remember firing at something where we weren't getting shot at.
Okay. Okay. And this is just kind of a sidebar question. I know that the Cambodians did have an air force, and one of my friends, he was flying a bird dog, and a Cambodian fighter pilot, came flying next to him and basically gave him the indication, "I want you to land." And my friend said, "No, I'm not landing." And he did some maneuvers in the bird dog and was able to lose this guy. But did you ever see any other, like, enemy craft when you were flying in Cambodia?
Personally, I never saw a Cambodian aircraft or a North Vietnamese aircraft. Saw a couple of CIA aircraft. Because where we were located right next to the border, sometimes they would drop in and refuel their aircraft
Okay.
instead of going all the way back over into Thailand to refuel. You know, so they were flying what we called STOL, STOL aircraft, so they could
Okay.
land and take off in a very short distance. Yeah.
I think, did they use those in the in World War II? The Germans, they had a similar plane that was very very adapted, taking off on short runways, or landing. A similar aircraft seems to ring a bell.
Most of those aircraft were just, you couldn't carry much on it. It was more observation than
Right.
anything else. Yeah.
Um, I'm having a bit of a blank moment here. When you were flying, that you were saying that or when you came back, you were saying that there would be that you guys would have a beer, but you'd have to be careful that you didn't have multiple beers because you would be flying the next day. But you also said that you were there hanging out with the recon teams as well, right? And so that must have been kind of interesting, to be in that environment. Were there some better bars, or like, I mean, I know that you weren't going off base, but was there one area that your drinks that they were more entertainment or anything?
No, there was only one bar for. We had an officers club, and I think the NCOs had a NCO club, basically, or enlisted club, and so we would normally get up about 5:30 in the morning and go get a mission brief, be off the ground by 6:30, and then fly out to that forward operating location. But same thing would happen at nighttime. We'd get back and debrief, go eat dinner, and it was a Vietnamese dining hall. So we ate the same place that the SF ate, and everybody else that was on the facility would eat at. And then we'd come back and have a beer or two. And you didn't have very many because you knew the routine. You're going to be getting up at 5:30 the next morning. And about all the beer would do at that point was just relax you a little bit so you could go to sleep. Because it was difficult some days to go to sleep. And you needed as much sleep as you could possibly get. So yeah, we did have a little bar that we'd go to, and we'd all sit around the bar. And I forget what night, but one or two nights a week we'd have a movie projector, and they would show some kind of movie. And you never knew whether you're going to get the first reel or the second reel
Oh,
or the
really?
third reel first. So you might start out in the middle of the movie and then see the first of the movie to the next reel. And you got down to a real nice part where there might be some pretty girls or something like that. And somebody had cut that out. So you had a blank spot there and you didn't get to see that. But it was entertainment. Yeah.
I know that on some of those movies at various SOG camps, that the indigenous guys really enjoyed seeing the John Wayne style westerns with the
Right.
shootouts and all.
Right.
That was something that they really enjoyed.
But that's how we got to know the special forces. And I think that's why they liked us so much, because they became friends. Yeah. Uh, and they knew by sleeping basically in the same barracks and having a beer with them and eating in the same dining area, we got to know them really well. And you weren't going to leave them out in the field. You were going to get the guys out. And that was one of the things that we were taught in the 20th. You never leave anybody on the ground. You get everybody out. And that's what we did. Yep. And I think they liked that. It wasn't an outside unit that didn't know them that was getting called for them to come help. They knew we were going to be there, and we were always going to be there for them.
and now at this point that you were not able to do any night flying at all. I mean, you could probably get away with dusk, maybe, but that would be it. You were saying that you'd want to be back by a certain time, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
we didn't have very many, there were no nav aids out where we were, navigational aids where we were flying. And so you'd be flying blind. So we didn't fly, I never flew a night mission when I was in Vietnam. And I don't think the unit flew any night missions while I was there. But it was just we took off after the sun came up and we landed before the sun went down.
And now, did the Air Force? I know somebody asked me this question. Did the Air Force have other, chopper units that were doing spec ops? I personally don't know of any, so that's why.
No. Yeah. We had a sister unit over in Thailand and us. So that was the two units. So there weren't very many. You had other Air Force helicopters over there, but they were primarily air rescue,
Oh,
Jolly
okay.
Green Giant.
Right, right.
And then you had helicopters at the bases in case an airplane crashed. They had a unit they could pick up and drop and extinguish the flames from the aircraft when it would crash. So you had those type units too. But we were the only Air Force unit flying special operations in Vietnam.
Now, you did have some one experience with the Navy, which I found was really amazing. So you were asked to go to a naval base, and I'll hand that over to you.
It wasn't really a Navy base, but it was a Navy facility down in the Delta. And we'd gotten a call that they wanted to bring one special operations helicopter down and put some bomb racks on it and see if we could drop bombs. And that was kind of interesting. And our commander tasked me to do that. So I flew out of Saigon and went down to this Navy facility and landed on a little Navy pad. And it was right next to the river. And it wasn't a base, it was just very small. And so they came out and they put a bomb racks on either side of the helicopter and attached some 250-pound bombs to it. And I made myself a bomb sight with a grease pencil mark on the bottom chin window so I could see the ground and give me an idea of when I was going to drop the bomb. And we flew over a target they gave us and we practiced dropping these bombs. And it worked pretty good. But the idea was to put some gas type in, I don't know what you want to, I forget what the nomenclature was, but it was a gas bomb. And the idea was to put everybody to sleep so that you could sneak in, get everybody out without killing people. And
POW camp, that's what you were saying,
yeah.
right?
They'd located some prisoner of war camps and they were going to go in there and put everybody to sleep. And then we were going to get the prisoners out. But it never did happen. I guess too many people got involved and they found out that we couldn't drop gas legally and we didn't do it. So,
Is there one of your missions that really stands out? Like, was there ever like an engine failure or something that really got, very hairy? I mean, you're not just dealing with the enemy shooting at you, you're dealing with like a storm front coming in, you're dealing with all sorts of different, variables that you can't control. So is there one or two events that you can recall that were a little bit of a pucker factor moment?
the biggest problem that we were flying the P model, which was actually the F model that had been modified with guns. And the P model had a General Electric engine, and it wasn't very susceptible to foreign object damage, FOD. So anytime we were landing the slicks, there was a lot of dirt and dust and grass and that kind of stuff being picked up and ingested into the engines. And they were having a lot of engine failures. And the guys would have to make an auto rotation because it's a single engine helicopter. And the Air Force decided to put a twin engine helicopter in place of the single engine helicopter. And we got the N model about halfway through my tour, and it had twin engines. So it made you feel a lot safer. So that was one of the things. But yeah, there's always a couple missions. We were flying out of a Quan Loy, Loc Ninh area, Parrots Beak region of Vietnam. And we were working with the King Bees, and we were carrying a lot of Vietnamese into Cambodia, because about this time the president said we couldn't have American forces into Cambodia or Laos. And so we couldn't take teams like we had been doing. So now we were carrying large groups of South Vietnamese over into Cambodia. And we were flying close to Snool, Cambodia. And so we launched one day with 10 King Bees, and we had a landing zone probably about 25 miles outside of Snool, next to a river. And the 10, we flew over with the guns. So we flew out there with the King Bees. We made a couple passes with our gunships just to see if anybody was on the ground. We didn't see anything. And we told the King Bees they could come in and land. So as the last King Bee came in and offloaded the troops and took off, the LZ had trees all around it. And I don't know if they'd had advanced intel we were going to land there, but it was a trap. And the fire just opened up everywhere. So we had to go back down. The King Bee yelled, "Hey, I've been shot in the tail with a round. I'm having to land over here on this little road." And so he did that, and we were flying our dog bone pattern, trying to get the South Vietnamese where they could break away from where all these bad guys were. And the King Bee pilot called up and said, "Hey, I got North Vietnamese guys running down this road to get us. Please come help us." So we broke off our gun pattern, came back around and flew over the king bee that was now sitting down on this road. And we opened up on the guys that were running down the road to get them. And we got those guys, and we called in another king bee, and the king bee came in and picked the pilots up. Well, once they picked up the pilots, we went back over and started flying our patterns again, and we'd yelled for help from 2 more gunships to come out. So they got out there about that time, and we were Winchester. We'd ran out of ammo, and we headed back to refuel and rearm. So we ran back, refueled, rearmed, headed back, and about halfway back, a 51 caliber opened up on us. And I was flying, and all of a sudden I got these shells. I could see the tracers going in front of me, and you could hear them. That's how close it was. So I don't know how much he missed us, 5, 10, 15 feet, but it was too close. And the right gunner said, "Break right." And I broke right, and he opened up on the 51 cal, and he killed the gunner on the 51 cal before they got us. And at that time, I was diving to the ground, and I probably hit 150 knots. And the end model max speed wasn't quite supposed to be quite that high, so I had to write the aircraft up when I got back for flying too fast. But we went from 1,500 feet down to treetop level as fast as we could to get out of the air, because we were afraid that guy was going to get us.
Wow.
So we catch our breath and we climb back up and we catch up. I was flying number 2, and we catch up with lead, and we go in and we get a radio call that they want us to destroy the king bee after we get the team broken away from where the North Vietnamese were. And we finally get them broken away, and we go in and blow up the king bee and go home. And this sounds like a short mission, but it's like 5 hours. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I get out of the helicopter and I fall flat on my face. My legs didn't work, but that was the adrenaline. And, my adrenaline had been pumping there for 4.5 hours. And when I got out of the helicopter, the adrenaline had quit, and I fell flat on my face, and the guys had to come pick me up off the ground. So that was one mission that really stands out.
Was that quite common? I mean, if guys flew a longer mission, that they would just be so tired and so drained that they would be weak?
Normally, that was the only mission I ever went on where I had to go out twice to the same site.
Okay.
So normally we got everything done on one mission. It wasn't a second mission. Yeah. But in that case, we went out with 2 gunships. 2 gunships replaced us, and then my 2 gunships went back out. So we'd had 6 gunships out there. So that was a long mission.
And did you ever, like, as a pilot, when you land, are you taking a visual around your craft the moment that you get back to base, just to see if there's anything that's being shot up or whatever?
Didn't have to. The gunners would have told us by this time. They would have heard it. You would hear it. Somebody would have noticed it. Yeah. So you would know before you ever landed if you'd taken hits or not. I never took a hit, knock on wood, while I was there. Yeah.
So are there aspects of that flying that you miss, or do you not? I mean, it was very, I know there are horrors to war, but that excitement, it must be hard to match that kind of excitement. And I know a lot of SF guys or spec op guys find that a real challenge when they come home, that they've been used to that adrenaline high, that everyday life is very boring, right?
Yeah. You did have an adrenaline high. There's no doubt about that. But the thing you don't miss flying the mission as much as you miss the guys that you were flying the mission with. You really got close with the other pilots and with the guys in the back. We all became very close friends. We were brothers. That's what we were. And we'd be there no matter what happened to protect that person. So you really miss that comradeship that you had with the guys.
And now, did you have the same crew all the time unless somebody was injured or sent home?
No. We had 50 pilots when I was over there. And out of that 50 pilots, we probably had 2 lieutenant colonels and maybe 2 majors, and all the rest of us were captains. So there was 46 captains.
Wow.
And you would go up to Bambi to it, and they would assign you a crew. and you didn't know who the crew members were going to be. So you would fly that whole week with that one crew.
Oh, okay.
Then when you went back to Cameron Bay, you may or may not ever fly with that same group of people again. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But we were all trained the same way by the same people. So we all knew exactly what to do. So it didn't make any difference who you were flying with. We all flew the same way.
And when you were up there for a week, would you be issued the same craft every time you went out, or you just went out there and you're Charles or Captain Merriott that you're taking plane two, or like how does that work?
No, they would when you got there, they assigned you an aircraft and you had that same aircraft for a week because each aircraft was a little bit different. So when you got in, the seat was adjustable. And,
Right.
we had short pilots, we had tall pilots. So you had to adjust the seat where it was comfortable for you. Then once you had the seat where it was comfortable, then you would take the gun sight and you'd put a little mark on the windscreen where the gun sight showed you that's where you need to shoot. Then you'd put the gun sight back up. And so you had this grease pencil mark. And the reason we didn't keep the gun sight down was when you're flying treetop level, that gun sight might just hide that one tree that's going to knock you out of the air. So we never had the gun sight down when we were flying the mission itself. And you would go out, we'd find a river before we ever got to the forward operating location, and we'd fire a rocket or two to be sure our sight was right where we wanted. And the minigunners would fire the miniguns to be sure they were going to work. And on one of those missions like that, I was number two, and we were firing into a river. So number one was pulling up, and I was pulling in behind it to test my guns, and he flew through the top of the trees, and it broke both chin windows out and put a
Wow.
big impression where the battery was, where he had hit the tree. And he
Wow.
called, and you couldn't hardly understand the word that he was saying because all the wind noise coming through the helicopter. And we went back to Bammy Tuit, and he changed helicopters.
So
But we were
let's
amazed that he made it through the top of that tree. We
so you
thought we'd
just
lost a bird.
oh, I'm sure. So you just touched on something that is very very interesting, and that is that some of us have heard there's on YouTube, and it's not nice to hear, but there's actually the audio of a SOG team that's pinned down, and there is loss of life, and you can hear the helicopters, that the recon team are talking over the radio to the helicopters and to the FAC. And my question last week to you was, how do you manage with all those voices coming through? You're trying to fly the bird in a hot zone, and you have this recon team that's in trouble, or it's they're under attack, or even if they're not. So how are you able to filter all those voices out who are normally not always calm, right? They could be elevated. They could be a guy talking faster. There could be a guy that's from the deep south that his accent is very thick. How do you manage to pick and choose what you're listening to?
It was kind of funny. We'd get out to the site. The forward air controller would give the FOL a call saying, "Hey, we got a team under fire. You need to get out here as quick as possible." So we'd launch two guns and two slicks, and we'd head out that way. And as we got closer, we'd tune over to where the team radio frequency was. And if they were whispering, we knew that they weren't under contact yet, but that the enemy was real close. And if they had real loud voices, you knew that they were in contact and they needed help right now. But so we had a UHF radio, a VHF radio. We had our intercom system. We were listening to our home base. We were listening to the FAC. We were listening to the team on the ground. We were talking to the other helicopters in the flight. And occasionally you tell the co-pilot, "Okay, I want you to take this radio and I'm going to concentrate on this radio." So sometimes you'd let him have part of the radios and you'd have part of the radios. And if he heard something important, he would transfer that information over to you. But it was trying to fly, set up a pattern, listening to the guys on the ground, talking to the crew, listening to the FAC. You could get an overload of information, so you had to filter what you wanted to hear. And sometimes that meant turning one of the radios off, perhaps, or letting the other pilot hear it. Yeah. So it was very interesting. Yeah. Because your brain can only take so much information,
Yeah,
and you have to share that with somebody else.
that's wild. And what I found really interesting was because this is kind of new to me, learning about the 20th SOS. I've learned about it from talking to Jim Burns or like RT and those missions, but not many pilots. A lot of gunners, crew chiefs. So what I found interesting was that you told me that in your bird that you were able that the gunner could actually put the miniguns in a forward angle and lock them, and then you as a pilot or would be able to shoot those guns. So that I
My
found.
hero, my hero when I was growing up was John Wayne. You know, so anytime you got an opportunity, not on the actual mission, but on a training mission or something like that, you could have the gunners fix forward the two miniguns. So you could lower the nose of the helicopter while you're flying, and you could fire both miniguns at 4,000 rounds per minute, and all you saw was flames coming out in front of you. And it was pretty interesting. The gunners didn't like it. The guys in the back didn't like it. Yeah, but they let us do it occasionally. And I'd say they let us. Whatever they told us to do that they needed, they got it because we were brothers. When we listened to one another, we did what one another was telling us to do. And a lot of times they would save our butts because they could see things out the side that we couldn't see in the front. So we paid a great deal of attention to what they had to say.
Now, is there an area on a Huey? I mean, obviously, the pilots or the crew getting shot, but was there an area in the engine or in the tail boom that really, if you got shot there, I mean, that was really serious? Was there like weak zones to the Huey?
The whole helicopter was a weak zone. you, you had the engine, you had the transmission, you
Right.
had the gearboxes. If any of those took a round and damaged them, you were hurting. And most people don't think about the tail rotor, but
Yeah.
we have gearboxes back there. And if you lose the tail rotor, the helicopter is just going to spin down. You can't control it. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of weak points, and there was no armor under any of those things.
So even I mean, you were there quite late war. So were there, I mean, after the Vietnam War, were there, because I know that you stayed in, were there more advancements to a Huey, like, lessons learned in the combat role of a Huey? And then they changed, oh, yeah, we should add bulletproof or some armor underneath the whole front canopy or anything?
The lesson I learned was when a war is over with, the U.S. military's the monies they get go down. So
Mm,
there's not any money to do that.
okay.
Yeah. We're out of the war. We don't need to fund them as much as we used to. So you lose your funding. And so no, those modifications that you were talking about that should have been done, they weren't done. Yeah.
I do.
It's not kind of sad. Yeah.
Yeah, for all those men that died or were terribly injured, that's pretty crappy that they didn't make a few adjustments, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean,
When I got back, I ended up being back in the 20th at Hurlburt after I got back in the States after a couple of years at Otis Air Force Base. And we had the same helicopters that we'd had in Vietnam primarily.
wow.
And what they had done when they had sent the helicopters over to Vietnam, they'd put foam in the engine set in the fuel cells so that they wouldn't catch on fire if they took rounds through the fuel cells. So that foam would protect the people flying the helicopter itself. What they didn't realize was after a long period of time, that foam would deteriorate and then it would get into the fuel itself. And in a Huey, you had boost pumps. We had two underfloor cells for fuel. And one side had a boost pump that would pump the fuel to the engines itself. The other cell was connected by a crossover tube. The other cell had the gas gauge. So the cell that had the gas gauge on it basically didn't know how much fuel was on this other side. So we were flying out in the Bahamas chasing druggers in the 1980s, and we lost a helicopter because that cross tube got clogged with that foam that had been put in there in Vietnam. And the fuel gauge inside the helicopter read that they had a couple 100 pounds of fuel, but on the side where they were actually pumping the fuel, that cell had drained itself of fuel and both engines quit, and we lost a helicopter out in the Bahamas.
Wow.
Yeah.
We should leave that part of your career for if we do a part two in the new year. But because you did some interesting things later on. I'm sure people are going drug runners. Did you blow up any drug boats? So we won't talk about that right now. We'll do that on another one. But I like to always one kind of fun question is I asked you last week if there was a Vietnam War movie that had helicopter scenes in it that you felt was close, because I know that Hollywood has never done a war movie that has been respected by combat veterans, that was real. We have people in some movies that are being blown up and their full bodies are flying through the air. We all know that that's not what happens, or that Rambo has 1,000 rounds to his rifle, all this kind of BS. So, is there a movie that you watched that had, helicopter scenes that you thought was close to reality?
Yeah. We were talking about that last time,
Yeah.
and I can't remember the movie. We Were Brothers, or
Apocalypse Now, that you said
well,
had.
Apocalypse Now
Yeah.
had a great helicopter scene where they came into a village basically and blaring
Yeah.
loudspeakers.
Right.
That never happened, that I knew.
Yeah.
But it was a nice helicopter scene.
Yeah.
But the movies that showed the Army slicks coming in, picking the guys up off the ground, brought back a lot of memories. Those Army pilots were really, really good pilots. They were all warrant officers. And they shared a life with those guys on the ground. And they did a lot of great missions. So anytime I saw a movie and I saw the Army slicks coming in and putting guys on the ground or picking guys up off the ground, it brought back memories of what we were doing. I actually only flew slicks probably 2 or 3 missions. I didn't like it. I'd rather be in a gunship. And probably this one of the scariest times I had. We'd picked up. I was flying slick aircraft out of Merriott, and I guess I was doing maintenance missions because I hadn't gone out on the actual mission with the guys. And we got a call to go pick up a prisoner. So, we cranked up a slick aircraft and we went out into Cambodia and found the Special Forces guys on the ground, and they had a prisoner with them. And so we took them back to Merriott, and they shipped the prisoner to Saigon. And about 3 days later, they brought the guy back. And this guy he was an NVA officer, North Vietnamese officer. So we were going to have to put him on the ground. And so we took him back in and dropped him off and said, hey, we'll pick you back up in 2 days. Well, 2 days later, we go back to pick this guy up. And here comes this NVA officer out of the tree line running to our helicopter. And I told the gunner, I said, he makes any kind of wrong move, you kill him. I don't want someone getting on the helicopter and he's going to shoot us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we took him back. And that was a strange mission. And that was probably as scared as I ever was, sitting there watching this guy in a uniform, NVA uniform, come running out to the helicopter. Yeah.
Wow.
You just didn't know if he had a grenade on him, or if he's still a friendly guy or he's a bad guy. It's a scary mission. But anytime I saw the Army helicopters on the ground doing those similar type things, it brought back memories. So not really one particular movie,
Right.
just any of those type scenes. Yeah.
I'd like to try and keep these to an hour. So we're almost approaching that. And I'd like to touch on something that's not always pleasant. For you, it wasn't too bad, or from what you told me, as far as any kind of PTSD or flashbacks or that kind of stuff. And you had said because you stayed in for so many years that you were kept busy. And it wasn't until that you retired that these memories that you were surprised that from 50 plus years ago. And so can we just talk about that just briefly? We don't have to go into great detail, but
Sure.
I think sharing some of this helps other veterans as well, right? So that's why I try and touch on it.
I probably had 4 assignments to the 20th SOS. One in Vietnam and 3 times at Hurlburt. So I was always doing the same mission, flying with similar type guys, flying with some of my old buddies from Vietnam. So never really had time to think about that. I think the guys that had problems were the ones that came home, got out of the military, went back into civilian life. They didn't have those friends or that comradeship or doing the same thing over and over and over. And I did that for 26 years, 25 and a half years. I flew those type missions. And so I never really had a chance to sit back and rationalize what had happened when I was in Vietnam because I was immersed in that. Now, we weren't getting shot at Hurlburt, naturally, but we were still flying the dog bone pattern. We still had the same Hueys, still had the same miniguns. So we were doing the same thing, and we were always training in case we had to do something different. And no, I never really had any problems until probably the last, I don't know, 10 years when I retired and I had more time to think about things. And occasionally at night, some of those missions will come up and you'll think about them. But I'm lucky in that most of my memories are good memories. They're not bad memories. So I never had the PTSD like a lot of the guys, even though sometimes I wake up sweating, but it's nothing bad. And I know some of the guys have it really bad.
Yeah, I know that's not a nice thing to talk about. It's just that I also, I mean, talking about it, like, it does help other people, other veterans. And also I want the public to know that, like, for you, that was over 50 years ago. And your war, a combat veterans war, is never over. It could be a movie, it could be a sound, it could be, a Vietnamese guy that you see at the market who looks like whatever. It could be all these things,
Oh, yeah.
so that's what I want the public to know. It's not that chapter of your lives is not closed, and that's the end of the story, right?
The only thing that, like that, what you're just saying,
Yeah.
that gets my attention real quick is a real loud sound because it gets my attention. I don't know what's taking place. So it takes you back to when you had those loud sounds in Vietnam, those explosions, those bullets going by your head or whatever it might be. A loud sound gets your attention. It gets my attention.
So let's finish this one off with your story you told me about a loud sound that you were with
Oh,
that
yeah.
that woke you up, that got your attention, right?
Yeah. We, in 71, we'd gotten a mission to go down to help the Green Beret train the new guys just getting into country at Long Thon. And so one of the things, what we had, Long Thon was a neat place to fly because it looked heavy jungle. So you could go out into landing zones where you might have 125-foot trees and you just had a small area and you'd have to come straight down and the gunners would have to talk you down, stop down, back right, stop, go left 3, and they would talk you all the way down this hole. And then you'd drop the guys off on the ground and then come back out and come back around in an hour or two and pick them up. Well, we were going down and it was probably 130, 140-foot trees. We were about halfway down and I was flying it, and you have to be really careful when you're doing that because you're really close. The rotor blades are real close to the trees. And all of a sudden, this loud sound right next to my head goes off. And I stop the helicopter and I start back up. And the gunner says, "Sir, stop up. Nobody's shooting at us. This Special Forces lieutenant just discharged his weapon next to your helmet." And that loud bang got my attention and it scared me. Yeah. But you're trained for those type things. So I didn't crash the helicopter. I just started back out of the landing zone. Yeah. So yeah, that's a memory that will always be with me, with him discharging that weapon next to my helmet. Yeah.
And do fireworks ever bother you? Like on the 4th of July, does that kind of ever bother you?
No, no, the fireworks, no, no, no problem there. I think the guys, what most people don't realize, when you're in a helicopter, you're in your environment.
Right.
And as long as you're in your environment, the outside doesn't really affect you too much. I mean, you can see tracers and you can hear rounds, and you can hear the rockets going off and you can see them, but you're still in your environment because that's what we're trained to do. The guys that really, really have the problems are when they take you out of that environment and
Right.
put you into a different environment you're not trained in. And that's when you're going to really have a lot of problems, i.e., a prisoner of war, getting shot down, getting captured, getting lost from the guys that you're with. Those are the times that you're really, really going to get scared and you have to think about what you're going to do.
Well, for today, Mr. Merriott, let's conclude this, and perhaps in the new year, if you're free again. I've thoroughly enjoyed our two chats, and every time I learn a little bit more. And it would be great to have you back on again. So,
Can I tell you one more funny story?
of course, yes.
We were flying on a long haul and we had to refuel at an Army helicopter facility called Bearcat.
Okay, yeah.
So we flew over to Bearcat and we were hot refueling. We didn't shut the engines off.
Wow.
And there was a sign above the operations door that said, "The best aviators in the world have pissed here." And it's kind of funny how one little sign from 50 years ago has stuck in my mind, and I'll never forget that little sign over that door. The best aviators in the world. Yep.
Wow, that's kind of funny. That's kind of, especially, I mean, that's why these I don't like to call them interviews. I like to call them just open chats that we can have kind of a template to what we're going to talk about. But I love it when things come into the veteran's mind. Hey, just one sec before I lose this thought, let's talk about that. So that's very cool. So you guys have an amazing Christmas and a happy New Year, and we'll see if we can do this again.
Okay. Well, thank you. And you have a great Christmas also.
You too.